Everyone, thank you so much for your patience, and sorry it took me a little bit to get started. We're having some technical difficulties on our end, but we should be good to go now. Welcome to this week's Nature Web. I'm Sarah. I'm a teaching naturalist at the Montana Natural History Center, and with me today is Alyssa, one of my coworkers and friends at the Natural History Center. We are going to dive in from there. If you haven't found the chat box, go ahead and do so now. We'll be using that throughout the presentation to answer questions and get your input on a couple things. So if you want to start out by letting us know where you're tuning in from, that would be great. Again, thanks so much for joining us. Sorry for the delay. And we're just going to jump in. Again, testing out that chat box. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Got some from Lolo. Some folks from Missoula. Okay. Thanks for checking in with us. Thanks for being here. Today, we are going to talk about flowers and their besties, their friends, pollinators. So I'm super excited to share this with you because right now is such a great time to be talking about flowers because there's so much blooming. So many flowers have so many different colors, shapes, sizes. It's all happening right now. And it's super exciting. And just to give you a taste of some of this, I want to share some photos that I've taken over the last couple years with you, just to look at some of the diversity of flowers we have just here in our backyards in Montana. So I'm going to be using the common names when I describe these flowers. If you know a different common name, that's kind of how common names work. There are often multiple common names for different plants. But if you do notice anything or wonder anything while we're looking at these photos, please let us know in that chat box. All right, here we go. On the left side is an orchid called coral root, and on the right side, this is a flower called scarlet gilia or skyrocket. These two, left side is a vine called orange honeysuckle, and on the right are a type of paintbrush. On the left, these are buttercups, and on the right, an early spring bloomer are glacier lilies. On the left, we have the flowers of a Rocky Mountain maple shrub, and on the left, these lovely green flowers are called monument plant or green gentian. On the left are some flowers of a penstemon, on the right, a plant called forget-me-not. Off to the left, larkspur, and to the right, elephant's head. Try to see if you can figure out where the elephant is in those little flowers. Another orchid to the left called fairy slipper, and to the right are Montana state flower, the bitterroot. On the left, we have a flower called pearly everlasting, and to the right, creatively named greenish flowered wintergreen. These are just a few of our Montana flowers. We have hundreds of flowers, different species of flowers that bloom in Montana, and worldwide, there's an estimated possibly as many as 400,000 different species of flowering plants. That's a lot of flowers. So our question today that we're going to be exploring throughout this webinar is, why are there so many different flowers? Okay, but to answer that question, we have to start first with a different question, and that is, what do flowers do? What do you think? Do you have any ideas about what flowers do? These are some of the flower parts. Go ahead and type in the chat box if you have an idea about what flowers do for plants. What are all those petals, stamens doing for the plant? Any ideas? What do flowers do for our plants? All right. Look like we have a great idea already. Perhaps this is one of our students from our naturalist classes. Excellent. Good to see you here. Making seeds is exactly right. Flowers are designed to make seeds. And how do they do that? It's a really good question. First of all, what's a seed? We learned 2 weeks ago that the seed is the part of a plant that can grow a whole new plant. So if we didn't have seeds, eventually we would completely run out of plants. But because plants produce seeds, we will hopefully never, ever, ever run out of plants, because what would life be without plants? So what's a seed? A seed is a part of a plant that can grow a new plant. How do flowers make seeds? The details are that they combine the genetic information in the form of pollen and eggs from 2 different plants of the same species. Okay, this is called pollination, and the pollen fertilizes the eggs, and together they develop into seeds. Sounds kind of technical, so let's talk about what it looks like. Does it look like this? What's wrong with this picture? It doesn't look like this at all. Type in the chat box, what do you notice that's wrong with this image? Got 2 flowers, exchanging genetic information, pollen, eggs, forming a seed. Why doesn't it look like this in real life? Go ahead and type in the chat box. Yeah, flowers don't have faces. Any other ideas? They don't talk. They don't move. Yeah, this is the most relevant part for us. Flowers don't have legs. They cannot move back and forth to each other. So they need help. It doesn't look like this. They need some help because they're stuck in the ground. So they need some way of moving their pollen from plant to plant. So before flowers developed, plants were dependent on the wind. So they'd produce tons and tons and tons of pollen and hope that when the wind would pick it up and carry it off, it'd end up landing on the right spot. I got to see this in action just this weekend because it's still a strategy that some plants use today, like our conifers and some flowering grasses. So if you see ever a conifer tree out in the wilds and you see this cloud of yellow dust coming off it, that's pollen. It's just so much pollen, and it's just throwing its pollen out to the wind to hope that it ends up in the right spot. But now that we have flowers, plants can use pollinators, animals that are attracted to the shapes and the smells and the colors of those flowers. Plants can use pollinators to move pollen from one plant to another. And this means they can produce less pollen, but end up with the same or about the same number of seeds. So pollinators are super important. What are some, let's see, I talked about this. What are some pollinators that you know about? What are some pollinators? Go ahead and write in the chat box, what are some pollinators that you know about? Bees, for sure. Anything else? There's a bunch of different pollinators out there. It's kind of extraordinary. Butterflies, absolutely. Butterflies, more bees. Hummingbirds. Moths, yeah, bees. Moth down here. Flies can actually be pollinators, yeah. More bees. Beetles can be pollinators, and as people have mentioned, yeah, bats can also be pollinators. So we have a ton of different types of pollinators out there. And that brings us back to our first question. Why are there so many different types of flowers? given everything we've just talked about in the last few minutes, do you have an idea now about why there might be so many different types of flowers? Go ahead and type your ideas into that chat box. Thanks. Now that we've talked about all of these different things, seen these different pollinators, why might there be so many different types of flowers? Awesome. Yeah, I've seen some answers here. Exactly right. There are so many different types of flowers to attract different pollinators because different pollinators pollinate different flowers. And each different flower shape, each different flower smell, each different flower color is a different strategy that those flowers are using to attract those different pollinators. So for the next little bit, we're going to talk about some specific pollinators, the ones we've talked about earlier, and how each of the characteristics of those pollinators influence the types of characteristics the flowers that are trying to attract them have. Okay, we'll start with bees since they're such a familiar pollinator. There's actually 4,000 different species of bee found in the US alone, which is pretty extraordinary, and over 20,000 species worldwide. So bees are extremely important for us as humans in terms of our food and just the whole world in terms of having plants around. So bees, interesting information about them. They see blue, yellow, and ultraviolet light, but they can't see red light. Okay, they collect both pollen and nectar to feed themselves and their young. They have a strong sense of smell. And most bees live in hives or some kind of tunnel, so they're willing and able to crawl into small spaces. So how do these characteristics of bees influence what flowers look like? Let's go take a look. Most flowers that are trying to attract bees as pollinators are going to be blue or yellow, unlike the forget-me-not and glacier lily here. We've seen photos earlier of bees on those. So bee flowers are going to be brightly colored, blue or yellow often, or both. And one of the coolest things is that some bee-pollinated flowers use ultraviolet light to attract pollinators. Now we can't see it because we can't see ultraviolet light. But to bees, some flowers that look to us just solid color have this ultravioletly colored center that's called a nectar guide, which means the bee is going to go to that center patch like it's the target and get to the nectar more efficiently, which is the flower optimizing the bee's work. So they have that good partnership and friendship there. As we mentioned earlier, bees need both pollen and nectar. Most pollinators just go for the nectar, but bees go for both, which makes them the most efficient pollinators because they're actually collecting pollen deliberately. So pollen or bee flowers can produce less pollen because the bees already want it, but they do have nectar, so the bees have something to drink as well as getting the pollen. And bees can smell, so many bee flowers are going to have lovely, sweetly aromatic or minty scents to attract those bees. Finally, that ability to crawl into small spaces. There's so many different species of bees, and if every single bee could go to every single bee flower, it'd be harder to control and make sure that the pollen from one type of flower is going to the same species. So bee flowers are often going to be interesting shapes, often tubular, or just weird shapes because only certain bees can get into certain size tubes or part the different petals, like we're seeing in the larkspur, in the right way to get to the pollen. And so if it can only go to one of these three flowers, then it's more likely to go to the same type of flower in a row and get the pollen in the right spot. That's another way flowers kind of control which pollinators, and specifically which bee in this case, can access their pollen and nectar. So those are all ways that flowers use the characteristics of bees to interact with them as pollinators. Next up, we're going to talk about hummingbirds. Hummingbirds have good eyes and particularly respond to the color red. They have long bills, as we know. They don't have a great sense of smell, though. Hummingbirds can hover in air, and they drink nectar for most of their food. So what is it going to take to get this little hummingbird on the top of that branch there to come down to a flower? What is a flower that's pollinated by hummingbirds likely to look like? Go ahead and type your thoughts in the chat box if you would. What does a flower that is trying to attract a hummingbird as a pollinator look like? Got an answer. Red, absolutely. And beyond that, red flowers that often are tubular. Excellent, we've got a lot of great answers here. Yeah, so we saw 3 different types of these flowers in the very beginning that hummingbirds do frequent in our area. We have those red or orange flowers. They each have tubes, and the nectar is at the base of those tubes. So they have that long bill gets all the way inside that tube, and the flower, or the head of the hummingbird is going to be by the pollen that sticks out of the mouth of the flower. And all of those things work together to get the pollen on top of the hummingbird's head, and so it can take it to the next flower. Pretty cool. Our red flowers here. Next up, we're going to talk about butterflies. So butterflies have good vision, and they also have a poor sense of smell. So what I forgot to mention, hummingbird flowers don't necessarily have a good strong scent because hummingbirds can't smell it. Similarly, butterflies don't have a strong sense of smell. They like red, yellow, and orange, so most of the flowers they're going to are red, yellow, or orange without a strong scent. Have nectar at the bottom of their flowers as well, because they have those long tongues, the proboscises, to get in deep places. You can see butterflies aren't the most efficient pollinators out there because their long legs hold their body away from the flowers and make it harder to get pollen on them. Of the 3 here, obviously this middle butterfly is doing the best pollination work, and the other 2, you can't see any pollen on them. So butterflies are not the best pollinators, but it's still something that flowers can use to help them pollinate their flowers. Next up, moths. Some moths are active in the day and actually behave much like butterflies. So the photo on the lower left is a moth pollinator that's acting much like a butterfly. Some moths actually act and look more like hummingbirds. This photo in the middle shows that. But some of our moth pollinators are going to be active at night, like we think of them as. And those moths have a strong sense of smell. So flowers that are trying to attract nocturnal moth pollinators anyway, are going to be open in the evening, and they're often white or light colored because those are the colors that do show up best at night. And they will often release scent either in the evening or late afternoon to attract those moth pollinators as well. Usually a sweet floral smell. The top flower is an evening primrose, named because it does open overnight and into the morning. And then the bottom picture is a mock orange, which has a really lovely fragrance that comes out in the late afternoon to attract moths. Cool. Beetles, another pollinator we don't think of a ton of the time. They also use their sense of smell to find food. And beetles are kind of funny because they can't fly super well. So they need large landing areas to be able to access flowers. So beetle pollinated flowers smell fruity often, strong smell to attract the beetles, and then are usually in clusters or are large flowers, so they have a place to land and aren't just falling off and missing out on the pollination act. Next up, flies. We have lots of different types of flies, just like we have lots of different types of moths. Some of them, like the fly in the middle, are bee mimics, so they'll be attracted to the same types of flowers that bees are. But then some of them are simply the flies we think of that are attracted to things that we think of as bad smells, putrid odors like rotting meat or dung of scat. Um, and they're more attracted to yellow or dark purple colors. And flies can be more active earlier in the year than bees. So a lot of our early season flies, or sorry, flowers are going to be yellow because then they can do dual attraction for both the flies and then the earliest bees. Um, but some flowers that are trying to attract flies use color, but they also use scent. So this plant over on the right-hand side of the screen is called skunk cabbage, not obviously because it looks like a skunk, but because it smells like a skunk. And that skunky odor is really attractive to flies, even though we don't like it so much. And so flies will come up to this plant and help pollinate it. Last but not least of these common pollinators that we've been talking about are bats. Back in our second webinar, we had a great presentation of bats. So we know they're nocturnal animals, bigger than most insect pollinators. Some bats do drink nectar, although we know most bats eat insects, and some eat insects that are perched on flowers. And the bats that drink nectar or eat fruit have a good sense of smell, and some of them don't do as much echolocation as we think of as your typical bat action. So flowers that are going to be pollinated by bats are going to be open at night. They're often fairly large, and they have nectar and have a strong fruity or fermented smell to attract those bats to come in. So those are our common pollinators that most people know about, but nature is really creative and there are actually a lot more pollinators out there. I'm going to tell you about a couple more, starting with, on our left over here, lemurs. Lemurs are native exclusively to the island of Madagascar, and these flowers that they pollinate, that this one in this drawing is perched on, are also native to Madagascar. This plant is called traveler's palm, and it is so dependent on lemurs to pollinate it that its flowers don't open up all the way. Lemurs have really, really strong hands, and unlike most of the rest of our pollinators, they are going to actively kind of pull apart these flowers of the traveler's palm to get their faces in to drink the nectar, and they'll get the pollen all over their face, and they'll go to the next tree, do the same thing, use those strong hands to open up and take the pollen to the next tree. That's pretty cool. We have a primate pollinator in the lemur. And next over here, we have a honey possum. These little creatures are native to Australia, and they use their prehensile tails, which means they can curl their tails and hang from it, to access blossoms in trees like the eucalyptus trees. And so they'll use that pointy snout and their long tongues to get into these flowers and drink nectar. And their fur will pick up the pollen as they go, and they'll crawl over to the next tree and take the pollen to it. Last but not least, the ones I'm going to talk about today are geckos. Fun fact, there's actually 40 different species around the world of lizards that pollinate flowers. So they go to drink nectar, like so many other things do, when there isn't much water available. And when they're drinking nectar, the pollen gets on their scales and they scurry off to the next tree and the next flower and take that pollen with them. Pretty amazing. We don't even have 40 species of lizard here in Montana, but there's 40 species of lizards around the world that help flowers pollinate. So these are just a small sample of the amazing pollinators that are out there. And just the way the flowers adapt and shape themselves to take advantage of these different animals is pretty extraordinary, pretty creative, although nature isn't deliberately being creative. But right now, we're going to start an activity and we're going to be creative ourselves. So our activity today is going to be coming up with, inventing, dreaming up our own flowers that can be pollinated by the animal of our choice. So the first task, if you were a flower, what type of animal would you want to use as a pollinator? It can be fun, it can be realistic, whatever you want. Think of and write in our chat box, what type of animal would you want to use as a pollinator if you were a flower? To get those juices flowing, I'm going to go ahead and share some photos you could maybe use as inspiration. Hummingbird would be fun, bats. Even beyond that, if you were a flower, could you use a duck or a spider or a grizzly bear or a frog or a bald eagle or a bison to help you pollinate something? What type of, like, dream big, because we're going to be creating our own flowers rather than real flowers. Alyssa wants to be a bobcat. Chicks. Yeah, so dream big. What type of animal, if you could have any animal in the whole world pollinate you if you were a flower, what animal would you want to use a pollinator? So think about that. An eel, that's amazing. That'd be super interesting to figure out how to use an eel as a pollinator. Yeah, so keep this in mind. The next step, and you're going to do most of this on your own at the end of this webinar, but this is your first thing, is coming up with the idea, what do you want to use as a pollinator? The next piece, dog, yeah, that'd be fun. The next piece then is to figure out what are the characteristics of that animal that would help you as a flower attract that animal to pollinate. Okay, so what are the important characteristics of the animal? After we're done here, the easiest thing for you to do will make a list of what you know about that animal, okay? And think about all of the characteristics of it. When you have that list compiled, you'll be able to look at that list of characteristics and think about which of those characteristics will then be useful to you as a flower to help you pollinate or get pollinated. Okay, so to make sure this is clear, I'm going to show you my example. I, for one, thought it would be really interesting and fun to be pollinated by a grizzly bear. Okay, so I have my list of facts about grizzly bears here. And not all of these things, I did some research and I pulled out the things that I already knew. Not all of these things are going to be super useful to me as a flower. For example, I can't run, so the fact that a grizzly bear can run up to 30 miles per hour is simply not really relevant to me as a flower trying to get pollinated. But there are some of these details, characteristics of grizzly bears that could be useful to me as a flower. For example, they like to eat berries and they have a strong sense of smell. So those two things I can use as a flower. If I have a strong smell like a berry, I'm more likely to be able to attract a grizzly bear to me. And as a bonus, grizzly bears are furry and pollen sticks to fur, so they're not a bad choice as a pollinator in that regard. Okay, once you've come up with your list of characteristics after we're done, then it's up to you to figure out how your flower would look and draw your flower. So using the characteristics of the animal you're trying to attract, what is your flower going to look like? And what are the special characteristics that are going to let you as that flower attract the animal you chose to be your pollinator? Things to think about are the size of your flower, the shape, the color, the scent, whether or not you have nectar, the location of the pollen, whether it's tucked down inside the flower or held out. All of those details, when your flower blooms, what habitat it's living in, all of these things are useful information to think about in terms of how to attract your animal as a pollinator. So once more, I'm going to show you my example, what I came up with for my grizzly bear pollinated flower. I decided to call it, and this is a fun thing, you can always name your plants. I decided to call it a huckleberry trickster flower because in my mind, this plant looks a little bit like a huckleberry plant. And it has these purple flowers that are small and round. They look a little bit like berries, but they have pollen that's held up out of the flower. and they smell really strongly like huckleberries. So when a bear gets a sniff of this from downwind someplace and comes up to investigate, it's going to come stick its head into these plants and get covered in pollen before it manages to eat the berries or the flowers accidentally. And then it's going to be able to take that pollen off to the next plant once it's all over its head, like that. So come up with that list of characteristics for your animal, and then figure out how to use those characteristics to create a flower. Those are your activity tasks. We would love to see your creations if you do come up with a flower that's pollinated by these amazing animals, falcon, foxes, dogs. So if you want to share your drawings with us on Facebook or Instagram, please tag us at the Montana Natural History Center and use the hashtag naturalistmoment. So I hope you really enjoy this activity in the next little bit. And thanks for joining us. If you have any questions about any of the material that we've covered, I know it was a lot of information in a short amount of time. If you have any questions, love to take those now. And if not, again, enjoy your drawings, and thanks for joining us. Okay, do we have any questions? Or Alyssa, anything else to add either?
Sorry, I wanted to unmute. That was fantastic. Thanks everyone for the great ideas. We'd love to hear your questions. And thank you, Sarah. That was super informative.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Not seeing any questions here. Again, thanks for coming and joining us. It was wonderful to have you with us. Hope you have a wonderful day and enjoy seeing some of those flowers and thinking about what's pollinating them when you're out in the world in the next little bit. Take care. Have a great afternoon and rest of your day.